If you cut sugar out of your diet completely, starting today, do you think that would stop you from developing diabetes? Most people over 50 believe the answer is yes. I want to introduce you to someone who believed that too, so completely that she built her entire sense of safety around it. Her name was Linda. She was 67, a retired school teacher, and for 15 years she hadn't touched a can of soda, a slice of cake, or a spoonful of sugar in her coffee. She brought her own stevia packets to restaurants, tucked into her purse just in case. At every birthday party, she'd wave off the cake with a little smile and say, "Not for me. I'm the one who's never getting diabetes." Her friends used to tease her about it. She wore that line like a badge. So when her doctor called her in for routine blood work, she wasn't worried at all. But her doctor looked at the numbers, paused, and said something Linda never expected to hear. "Linda, your blood sugar is in the diabetic range." Linda sat there stunned, running through 15 years of birthday cakes she'd turned down, 15 years of black coffee, 15 years of that same proud sentence she'd repeated so many times it had almost become part of her name. And the question she asked her doctor that day is the exact same question we're going to answer for you right now. If sugar wasn't the reason, then what was? Before we go any further, if you're someone who wants evidence-based health advice made specifically for adults over 50, consider subscribing to Prime Health Insight, because every week we break down the science into simple steps you can actually use in real life, the same way Linda's doctor eventually broke it down for her. No scare tactics, no miracle cures, just clear, honest information. Here's what Linda's doctor explained to her, and it's going to change how you think about your own body too. Type 2 diabetes is not, at its core, a sugar disease. It's an insulin problem. Sugar is just the messenger that gets blamed for something much bigger happening behind the scenes. Picture your cells as millions of tiny locked doors, and insulin as the key that goes around unlocking them so sugar can leave your bloodstream and enter your muscles, where it becomes fuel. When that system runs smoothly, your blood sugar stays balanced no matter what you eat. But for millions of people over 50, including Linda, those locks slowly start to rust. The key still exists. It just doesn't turn as easily anymore. This is called insulin resistance, and it is the real starting point of diabetes, often years before a blood test ever shows a problem. Now here's the twist that stunned Linda, and it might stun you too. You can develop insulin resistance while eating almost no added sugar at all, which means somewhere, right now, there could be a version of this exact story playing out in your own body, completely silently, with no cake, no soda, and no warning signs you'd recognize. Maybe you're watching this with your morning coffee right now, the same way Linda once sat with hers, feeling completely confident about your own numbers. Linda asked her doctor the same thing you might be asking right now. If it wasn't sugar, then what on earth had she been missing for 15 years? Her doctor told her there were a handful of hidden forces working against her, things nobody had ever explained to her in plain language before. And one of them had been sitting inside her, unnoticed, for over a decade, quietly shrinking with almost every year that passed. And stay with me, because the one he saved for last surprised her more than all the others combined. It starts with your muscles, and it's going to reframe everything you thought you knew about where sugar actually goes. Your muscles are one of the largest storage tanks for sugar in your entire body. Think of them like enormous warehouses waiting to be filled. When you eat, a large portion of that sugar heads for those warehouses first, to be saved as fuel rather than straight to fat storage. But starting in your 40s and speeding up sharply after 50, most people quietly begin losing muscle mass. Doctors call it sarcopenia. Researchers who tracked thousands of adults over 50 found that this loss can quietly accelerate decade after decade, often without a single ache to announce it. Linda had lost nearly 15% of her muscle mass over the previous decade, without a single symptom to warn her. Picture those warehouses slowly shrinking, shelf by shelf, year after year. Less warehouse space means sugar has nowhere to go, so it lingers in the bloodstream instead, forcing the pancreas to pump out more and more insulin just to compensate, the way any worker eventually burns out after years of unpaid extra shifts. And the cruelest part is that muscle loss doesn't announce itself. There's no alarm, no ache, no obvious signal telling you a warehouse just went dark. You simply wake up one day, like Linda did, 67 years old, feeling roughly the same as always, with no idea the storage capacity you'd relied on your whole life had been quietly shrinking behind the scenes for years. This is the moment Linda says changed her entire perspective. Her doctor told her, "You could have eaten zero sugar for the rest of your life, and your muscles still would have determined most of what happened to your blood sugar." Two people can eat identical meals, avoid the exact same treats, and still land in completely different places, because one of them is quietly losing warehouse space and the other isn't. And this raises an unsettling question. If muscle matters this much, what else has been working against people just as invisibly? Linda's doctor said the next one was even harder to detect because you can't see it or feel it at all. It's called visceral fat, and it hides deep inside your abdomen, wrapped around your liver and your pancreas. Unlike the fat you can pinch at your waistline, visceral fat behaves almost like a hostile organ itself, releasing chemicals that actively interfere with insulin's ability to do its job. This is why waist size often predicts diabetes risk better than total body weight does. Picture it almost like plastic wrap slowly tightening around your liver and pancreas, thin enough that you'd never feel it happening, yet close enough to interfere with organs that are supposed to be working in perfect coordination with insulin. Linda wasn't overweight by most standards. Her scale never alarmed her, but an imaging scan later showed a surprising amount of visceral fat surrounding her organs, fat that had been accumulating quietly for years, completely disconnected from her sugar intake, hidden behind a scale reading that told her everything was fine. Which brings us to something so unexpected that Linda actually laughed out loud when her doctor first mentioned it, before realizing it wasn't a joke at all. Stress. Ordinary, everyday, background stress. When you're under chronic stress, your body releases a hormone called cortisol, and one of cortisol's jobs is to deliberately raise your blood sugar, flooding your system with fuel in case you need to physically fight or flee. That response made perfect sense for our ancestors escaping danger, but modern stress rarely requires you to run anywhere. There's no physical threat to burn off that extra fuel, so it just circulates, unused, day after day. Linda had spent 3 years as the primary caregiver for her aging husband before he passed away, an experience filled with worry, sleepless nights, and constant low-grade tension. Here's the part that made Linda go quiet in her doctor's office. Studies on long-term caregivers have found stress hormone patterns similar to people carrying an extra 20 pounds, even when their actual weight never changed at all. Her doctor told her that period alone may have done more to shape her blood sugar than any dessert ever could have. Are you starting to feel this story rearranging itself in your mind? Because there's still one more piece to this, and Linda's doctor saved it for last on purpose, because it connects to something that happens to you every single night, whether you realize it or not. But before we get there, I want to tell you about someone else, because Linda wasn't the only person in that waiting room that year. Her neighbor, a retired contractor named Ray, had the opposite problem on paper. Ray loved sugar. He put it in his coffee, kept cookies in his truck, and never once pretended otherwise. And yet Ray's blood sugar numbers stayed perfectly normal year after year at his checkups. Linda used to joke that it wasn't fair. But here's the twist that made her doctor bring Ray up in the first place. Ray had spent 40 years doing physical labor. His muscle warehouses were enormous, built brick by brick over decades of manual work. His body could absorb far more sugar than most people's, simply because he had so much more storage space to put it in. Ray wasn't winning because he was lucky with sugar. He was winning because of something that had nothing to do with sugar at all. Two neighbors, two completely different relationships with dessert. And yet the real dividing line between them was invisible to both of them for years. That's how easy it is to draw the wrong conclusion from watching someone else's health from the outside. And it's exactly why Linda's doctor didn't want her to stop at just one explanation. Hold on to Ray for a moment, because his story isn't finished either, and what happens to him later might be the biggest surprise in this whole video. If this is helping you see your own health differently, do me a favor and tap that like button right now. It genuinely helps this information reach more people who deserve to understand their bodies instead of being handed oversimplified advice that leaves out half the truth. Now back to Linda. Because there's one more piece to this puzzle, the one her doctor called the most overlooked factor in modern medicine: sleep. Just a few nights of poor sleep can measurably reduce how well your body responds to insulin, even in people who are otherwise perfectly healthy. Linda hadn't slept well in years, not since her husband's illness began. She assumed feeling tired was just a normal part of grief, and later, just a normal part of getting older. Sleep is when your body performs critical repair work, including regulating the hormones responsible for hunger, fullness, and blood sugar control. When sleep is short or frequently interrupted, your body starts behaving as though it's under stress, even while lying perfectly still in bed. Cortisol rises, insulin sensitivity drops, and the next morning, your body processes that identical bowl of oatmeal completely differently than it would have after a full, restful night. Think of sleep as the overnight crew that's supposed to restock those same warehouse shelves and reset the locks on every door for the next day. When sleep is cut short, that crew never shows up. The shelves stay in disarray. The locks stay a little more jammed than they should be. Linda's poor sleep, her invisible grief, her shrinking muscles, and her hidden visceral fat had been working together for years, in complete silence, while sugar took all the blame. Here's a detail that stunned Linda almost as much as her diagnosis itself. Her doctor told her that a single week of consistently poor sleep can shift blood sugar responses by an amount comparable to gaining several pounds of extra weight. She hadn't gained much weight at all in those years. She'd simply stopped sleeping. So here's the moment that reframes everything, the exact sentence Linda's doctor said that she still repeats to this day. "Linda, you didn't fail. You were just fighting the wrong enemy the whole time." Sit with that for a second, because it might apply to you too. Her doctor explained it with one more picture that stuck with her, the same locks and keys he'd described on her very first visit. Two people can eat an identical slice of toast. One person's locks turn easily, letting sugar flow out of the bloodstream quickly into the warehouse, so blood sugar barely rises at all. The other person's locks stick and jam, so that same slice of toast causes a much bigger, longer-lasting spike, and the pancreas has to strain harder just to force those doors open. This is what doctors call insulin sensitivity. And unlike your genetics, it isn't fixed. It can improve or it can worsen, based almost entirely on the things we've been walking through together. There's one more twist Linda's doctor shared with her that day, and it's one that trips up almost everyone. Linda's mother had type 2 diabetes, and for years Linda assumed her own fate was already written in her genes, sealed the moment she was born. Her doctor gently corrected her. "Genetics can load the gun," he told her, "but your daily habits usually pull the trigger, or don't. Family history can make your locks a little more prone to rusting, yes, but whether they actually rust depends far more on the same forces we just walked through: muscle, fat, stress, and sleep, than on anything written in your DNA alone." That single reframe took away 15 years of quiet fatalism Linda had been carrying without even realizing it. She wasn't destined to repeat her mother's story. She simply hadn't been shown which levers were actually hers to pull. This changes the entire conversation, doesn't it? Instead of a story about willpower around dessert, this becomes a story about how your whole body functions as one connected system. Although, if I'm being honest with you, Linda didn't accept any of this right away. When her doctor first mentioned resistance bands, she actually laughed and said, "I'm 67, not 27. She left that appointment with a printed handout she didn't read for 2 weeks. She skipped her first 3 scheduled walks entirely, telling herself she was too tired, too busy, too old to bother starting something new. It wasn't a straight line for her, and it probably won't be a straight line for you either. But eventually, mostly out of stubbornness more than motivation, she decided to prove her doctor wrong instead of proving him right, and started anyway. Let's walk through exactly what she did next, because these are the same practical tools available to you starting today. The first thing she changed was movement, but probably not the kind you're picturing. Linda didn't join a gym or start running. She began doing something almost absurdly simple, a 10-minute walk after her largest meal each day. Picture yourself doing the exact same thing tonight, right after dinner, before you sit down for the evening. Muscles pull sugar directly out of the bloodstream when they're active. often without even needing much insulin to make that happen. Picture those warehouse shelves opening their doors wide the moment your legs start moving. Some research has shown that a short walk after eating can meaningfully blunt the blood sugar spike from that very meal. It costs nothing, and it takes less time than a sitcom rerun. Within a few months, Linda added light resistance bands, rebuilding some of that warehouse space her muscles had quietly lost over the years. She told her doctor it felt strange at first, almost silly, standing in her kitchen doing slow arm curls with a resistance band while dinner settled, half convinced her neighbors could see her through the window. But 6 months in, a follow-up scan showed something she never expected at 67 years old. Measurable muscle, gained back, warehouse space, rebuilt, not lost forever the way she'd always assumed aging simply worked. Next came protein, specifically making sure enough of it showed up at breakfast, which had always been Linda's most carbohydrate-heavy meal, toast and jam, most mornings, for decades. Think about your own breakfast tomorrow morning. Is it mostly carbohydrates too? Toast, cereal, a bagel, without much protein alongside it? It was her husband's old breakfast too, shared at that same kitchen table for 40 years, and some quiet part of her resisted changing it, as if adding eggs to the plate might disturb the memory sitting there with her. Protein helps preserve and rebuild muscle, your body's largest storage system for sugar. Shifting her breakfast to include eggs or Greek yogurt alongside her toast helped her blood sugar stay steadier for hours afterward, something she could genuinely feel in her energy by early afternoon, when she used to hit a wall of tiredness so predictable she'd plan her afternoons around it. That wall quietly disappeared within weeks, and she almost didn't notice until a friend asked why she seemed so much more like herself lately. Linda thought the diagnosis was the worst news she'd hear that year. It wasn't. 3 months into walking, resistance bands, and better breakfasts, she went back for a follow-up, fully expecting good news. Her doctor looked at her numbers and gently told her they'd barely moved. Linda was furious. She'd done everything he'd asked. What was she missing? Her doctor sat back and asked her one question that had nothing to do with food or exercise at all. Linda, when's the last time you had dinner with a friend? She couldn't remember. That's when he told her about the piece of the puzzle hiding in plain sight the entire time. It surprised Linda more than anything else, and it might surprise you too, because it has almost nothing to do with food at all. It's connection. After her husband passed, Linda had become increasingly isolated, and chronic loneliness has been linked to elevated stress hormones and worse blood sugar regulation over time. She'd actually quit her book club years earlier, telling herself she just didn't have the energy for small talk anymore. Her doctor encouraged her to rejoin it anyway. She almost didn't go back, sitting in her car outside the library for 10 minutes, telling herself she could still turn around and drive home. She didn't. Within months, Linda said she felt like a different person, not because a book club is medicine, but because laughter, conversation, and belonging appear to have a real, measurable effect on the very same hormonal systems we've been discussing this entire video. She hadn't thought of that ache as a health problem. She'd thought of it as just grief, something to quietly endure rather than something with a physical fingerprint on her blood sugar. Taking care of your blood sugar, it turns out, might genuinely include picking up the phone and calling an old friend. I'd love to know, what's true for you right now? Sleepless nights? Quiet stress? Muscle you've noticed slipping away without quite knowing why? I'd genuinely love to hear your experience in the comments, because these real stories help other viewers see what's actually possible, the same way Linda's story might be helping you right now. I want to pause here and be completely honest with you, because I don't want you walking away with the wrong idea. Sugar still matters. Reducing added sugar remains a smart, healthy choice, and nothing in this video suggests otherwise. But sugar was never meant to carry the entire responsibility for your blood sugar health. And for years, that's exactly the burden placed on it, because it's simple, it's visible, and it's easy to point a finger at. Meanwhile, the quieter forces, the ones that shaped Linda's story, muscle loss, visceral fat, stress, and sleep, kept working in the background, almost completely unaddressed. This is why some people can white-knuckle their way through years of avoiding dessert, feeling genuinely proud of their discipline, and still receive a diagnosis that feels devastatingly unfair. Their effort wasn't wasted. It was simply aimed at only one piece of a much larger puzzle, exactly like Linda's. Remember Ray, her neighbor with the cookies in his truck? About a year after Linda's diagnosis, Ray tore his shoulder lifting a ladder off his truck bed, and the recovery kept him mostly off his feet for 4 months. His sugar habits never changed at all, but at his next checkup, his numbers had crept upward for the first time in his life. His doctor wasn't surprised. 4 months without physical work had quietly shrunk the same warehouse space that had protected Ray for decades. He hadn't been winning because of luck or because sugar didn't matter to him. He'd been winning because he'd spent 40 years unknowingly building the one thing that mattered most, and that advantage could disappear almost as quickly as it had been built. So, where does that leave you? In a far more powerful position than you might expect, because once you understand that diabetes prevention is really about your whole system working together, you gain access to far more tools than food restriction alone. You can build muscle, you can protect your sleep, you can manage stress, you can nurture real connection. Each becomes another lever you can actually pull instead of relying on a single narrow strategy and simply hoping it's enough. I also want to gently mention something important. Everybody's body, health history, and risk factors are different, and blood sugar regulation can be influenced by many individual medical factors that only your own doctor can properly evaluate. If you have concerns about your blood sugar or your personal risk for diabetes, please talk with your physician. They can look at your specific numbers, your history, and your circumstances, and guide you personally, the same way Linda's doctor guided her. Nothing in this video replaces that conversation. It's meant to help you walk into that conversation more informed and ask sharper, better questions. Let's bring this full circle now, back to Linda, because her story didn't end with a diagnosis. 18 months after that appointment, Linda returned for a follow-up. Her doctor reviewed her latest numbers, looked up, and smiled. Her blood sugar had moved out of the diabetic range entirely. Not because she'd found some hidden willpower around sugar she'd somehow lacked before. She'd already had plenty of that for 15 years, but because she'd finally been given the right map instead of the wrong one. She'd rebuilt some of her muscle warehouses. She'd started sleeping again. She'd found her people again. And her body responded to all of it, together, exactly the way it had been designed to. Here's the sentence I want you to carry with you long after this video ends. Linda thought back to that old line she used to say at every birthday party, the one she wore like a badge for 15 years. I'm the one who's never getting diabetes. She doesn't say that anymore. Now she says something quieter, something that means more to her than the first line ever did. For 15 years, I fought sugar. The day I started fighting for my muscles, my sleep, and my people instead, my body finally started fighting for me. I finally understand why I got it, and that's the reason I don't have it anymore. That single sentence rewrites the entire story most of us have been told about diabetes, and it might just rewrite yours too. Think about how different Linda's 15 years might have looked if someone had handed her this map on day one, instead of leaving her to fight the wrong enemy alone with nothing but willpower and a jar of artificial sweetener. She wasn't lacking discipline or commitment. She was lacking information, the exact information you now have. Maybe you're exactly where Linda started, confident that avoiding dessert is enough. Maybe you're exactly where Linda ended up, holding a diagnosis that feels confusing and unfair. Or maybe you're somewhere in between, noticing small warning signs and wondering for the first time if there's more to the picture than you've been told. Wherever you are, the map is now the same one Linda eventually received, and you didn't have to wait 15 years or a difficult diagnosis to get it. If you know someone over 50 who's been struggling with their blood sugar or quietly blaming themselves for something that was never fully in their control, please share this video with them. It might replace years of unnecessary guilt with the kind of understanding Linda finally received, understanding that came almost too late, but didn't have to. You've just spent the last several minutes learning something most people go their entire lives never fully understanding. The real, layered story behind your blood sugar and your risk for diabetes. You now know this was never simply about willpower at the dessert table. It's about how well your whole body works together, day after day, warehouse by warehouse, night by night, connection by connection. And that gives you something incredibly valuable, real influence in far more places than you probably realized before you clicked on this video. You have more power over this than you were ever led to believe, not through restriction and fear, but through understanding, small, consistent action, and the kind of patience your body has always deserved from you. Take Linda's map with you today. Move a little more, sleep a little better, reach out to someone you care about, and trust that these small, steady choices are doing more for your long-term health than any single food rule ever could. Because now, unlike Linda, for all those years, you know exactly what you're actually fighting for. Tonight, before you go to bed, I want you to ask yourself one question. Am I still fighting sugar? Or am I finally ready to fight for the body that's been trying to protect me all along? Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this video gave you a new way of understanding your own body, that's exactly what Prime Health Insight is here for. And I'd love for you to be here with us next time as we continue exploring the real science behind living a longer, healthier, more confident life after 50.